Hi everybody, my name's Ruth and today we're going to take you on a beautiful spring walk in the forest. Because it's right at the beginning of the season, there'll be some plants that we find that we might not find later on. So come along and take a walk with us. So here we have our first plant. It's a beautiful shrub, and this is really the first plant we find flowering in the forest in the beginning of spring. And you'll notice that it has these drooping sprays of white flowers. They're beautiful, and they have a long kind of spatulate shape of leaf, and this is called the Osoberry. It's just been given its new name. And so look for them right in the beginning of spring. So this clump of plants that you notice here is called Oregon Grape. And those little tiny green berries that you just saw will get bigger. And here you can see that the small little green things that we saw have now started to open up into bright yellow flowers. So these are the flowers of the Oregon grape, and right where those flowers are, soon will start to grow the Oregon grape berry itself. They're small, dark berries, and these flowers are great for pollinators. So different bugs can come and get nectar, and they will pollinate at the same time. And Oregon grape is edible. You might not like it that much. It's kind of seedy, but it's good for making jam. So here we've got something very cool. It's called the skunk cabbage. And if you're up close to it, you could smell it. It gives off this pretty stinky smell. Another name for it is swamp lantern. And you can see, because if you look across the forest floor, this bright yellow just stands out. But coming back to the smell, you can see if you look at the middle of this plant, you can see that there's all sorts of little bugs crawling around. They are pollinating it, and this is where it's so cool. The plant, the smell that it gives off is meant to attract these little bugs. And as they're attracted in by the smell, they also, walking around on it, are helping to pollinate it. Isn't that great? The skunk cabbage leaves used to be used for lining cooking pits. Or they could have been used like that. Okay, now we're looking in this patch of sunlight at beautiful little ferns that are just starting to come up. And you can see how they're all curled up when they start. And then you can see a few of them that are starting to spread out their leaves now. It's a little hard to tell what kind of ferns these are just yet, but ferns are a really important part of the forest. They like to grow in cool areas, and so the forest is their perfect habitat. Hi everybody! Here we have a good example of how trees get decomposed in the forest. You can see all the way up and down this trunk, there are different bracket fungus. And these really you only see on trees that are dead or dying. And they are helping to break it down. And after a while, this tree will become nutrients back in the forest floor. But one of the things that also happens when a tree is dead or when it's dying, it might be because it's been infested with different kinds of bugs. And those bugs attract other creatures. So this is a good example of something that's been attracted to this tree. It's a nice big pileated or pileated woodpecker hole. And that's what they like for lunch. So once they can sense there are these bugs in the tree, like ants or termites or beetles, then they start with their strong beak bashing away at the tree, and they can dig pretty fast, and they can get quite a big hole, but it looks like a rectangular shape. That's how you can tell it's the biggest woodpecker making the holes. And then they find their food. Here's a mystery. If you look here, why do you think all this stuff is falling down from under this tree? Do you think there might have been something that crawled in there and started to make its home? What clues can you see? We're looking here at one of the things that really defines or is characteristic of the coastal temperate rainforest. And that is the sword fern, because it grows all year long. Some of the other ferns will die back in the fall and then just start to come back, like you saw up there. The fiddleheads will start to grow. But the sword fern stays, it doesn't die back in the winter. And if we look on the underside, on this one you can see some little orange fuzzy spots, and those are the spore cases. That's how a sword fern reproduces. It, with wind and rain particularly, those spore cases will open up and release spores, and that's how they reproduce. Here you can see, before we looked at the other fiddleheads and we weren't sure, but these ones you can see they're coming right from the base of the rhizomes of the sword fern. So we know that these are the fiddleheads of the sword fern. And you can see how they're all curled up. Here's another beautiful thing that you can find in the forest. What's your favorite? Do you like lily of the valley? Well, if lily of the valley is one of your favorites, does this look like them? They're all over the forest floor. But they're not real lily of the valley. These are called false lily of the valley. And you could take a little taste of them. Although, don't do this everywhere. Kind of tastes like lettuce. Do these look like carrot tops to you? Well, that's a pretty good guess, but what they are, if you look at the flower, it gives you the clue. You can see these beautiful little pink flowers, and they are in the shape of a little heart. And if you look on the bottom of it, you'll see another little part there that looks like just a little drip. And so they call these flowers bleeding heart. Here's what happens in the winter and in the big winds. Here we have another plant that grows nicely in the forest. It's called a red elderberry, not to be confused with other kinds of elderberry. You can see the flower just beginning in the middle there. And these will produce red berries later on in the season, which birds like robins or thrushes love to eat, but not people. Here is a really great example of one of the flowers we find in the riparian area, which means near the river in the wetland. And the cool thing about these, when the flower starts blooming, it blooms right at about the same time that the migrating hummingbirds come back. And what color of flowers are hummingbirds particularly drawn to? This color. After the flowers have matured and dropped off, they will be exactly in the same place, will grow a fruit. And it's called a salmonberry because it is the color of a salmon. There's a range, but they get a nice big edible berry and that birds love, but so do people. And before that, you get this beautiful, bright pink flower. And you can also, on this one, see the starting of these brand new leaves. And they're a very familiar shape. When they get a bit bigger, I say they look like a mustache. You see the two leaves at the top? And then here, like a little goatee. Other people, when you fold them in half, say they look like a butterfly. But that's a good way to identify them when they don't have their flowers or berries. Here we have, and I'm not going to touch it, a great example of some edible plants that grow right around us. They're called stinging nettle, and now you know why I don't want to touch it. There are little hairs all around the edges of the leaf and underneath. So if I was really good, I could grab it from the top and roll it shut, and I wouldn't get stung. I mean, if you get stung, it makes little red spots that will be itchy and stingy for about a day. So it's not the end of the world. But they are really, really high in vitamin C. So if you got out your pair of gloves and you came and picked some, and then you could cook them in soup, or you could put them in quiche, or you could dry them and make them into tea, and they're very high in vitamin C. So you can understand why this would be a good food after a long winter for indigenous people over the years. When these nettles start to come up in the spring, they're anxious to get them because they didn't have oranges that you could bring in from Florida. So they got their vitamin C this way. Stinging nettles. This beautiful red flower is on a little bush called red flowering currant. And these do produce berries which are edible. They also actually make really good purple dye if you want to try dyeing a piece of cloth or a t-shirt. The next plant we're going to look at is the reproductive part of a plant called horsetail. And it's right down here. Kind of looks like a cob of corn, or mini. And you can see it's got these bands all the way down. The inside of the stem is kind of hollow. This is the one version of the plant, and it's the reproductive part. Later on, other ones will grow up in different places that get leaves, but they kind of look like a bottle brush. And they are quite, if you feel them, they're quite rough. So they would be good, like if you wanted to scrub your pots if you were out camping, they would do a good job of that because they have little bits of silica, which is what sand is made out of. And they grow all over the place. Here we are standing beside the red alder tree. It's a pioneer species. And this is how it reproduces. It gets earlier in the spring. It has these long dangly things that produce seeds, and they're called catkins. And then these are the cones, the female cones. And you'll notice that the bark of the tree is quite smooth and silvery, and there's lots of lichen growing on it. And then up here you can see this is early. The leaves are just starting. And alders grow lots of different places.